because I knew what like I needed to do it. And ever since I've actually like added some more stuff to it. And you know, I think it's like one of the things important from penalty words. So yeah, I'll figure it out. Sorry, I'm sorry. I mean, that's not even good. I, yeah, there was, I guess I didn't, like, there were certain parts of the rubric that I just didn't really think about. And I just like, I got like information in there, but like as far as the page limit, that's their page requirement, my brain was like, no, it didn't, but like, I realize that's important now, so.
All right, good morning. I believe tomorrow's Halloween. Is anyone else excited? I think I ate like a record amount of candy this weekend. Like, I feel like I lost my mind a little bit. Like, I almost don't even care about the Halloween candy tomorrow because I ate so much of it this weekend. My kids went on like 4 trick-or-treating like things. And so I felt the need to, be a good parent, check their candy. And like, oh my God, I ate so much candy this weekend. Like by last night, I was like, my stomach hurts. I don't think I want candy. So no candy today in hopes that tomorrow I'm ready again, right? I might have asked you before, but anyone dressing up, doing anything fun tomorrow? Yeah, dressing up? Nice. You're going all out. I love that. I love that. I want to see pictures if you dress up, right? Like that sounded odd after you said I have like tight leggings on, but like I want to see pictures. Yeah, I love it. If you dress up, please take pictures. I'd love to see. I'll take pictures of my kids too. Right? They're gonna dress up. I'm gonna dress up. Maybe Indiana Jones. No, not super exciting, but brown's my favorite color, and it's like all brown. So why not? Right? I'll go for it. Anybody else dressing up? Yeah.
I'm probably just gonna throw a onesie on, but my sister decided last minute that she wants to be Abby Lee Miller for Kids Moms. Okay. She spent all weekend glitter painting the Abby Lee Dance Company shirt.
Nice.
And then she found like these like styrofoam balls in our like art cabinet and was painting them to make like bulky jewelry to wear.
I love it.
And so she's a freshman in high school, so she's decided she's going as Abby Lee, and I'm like, that's so exciting for you.
That is fun.
Last year she was Bruising Bell. She always comes up with the randomest costumes.
My kids keep trying to get their grandpa to dress up as Grusinger Bell, and I'm like, that'd be fun. I think. I brought you some candy. I mean, it's late. It's 10, right? It's totally late. So it's fine, right? I'm gonna. Pumpkin and crap. And so it's in like a sad pumpkin, but help yourself if you'd like some candy. I figure you're probably more interested in the candy today than I am, and you can help me with that. And then we will cover schizophrenia today, which I think is kind of, I don't know, we could skew that to say it's kind of interesting for Halloween at least. And then when I see you next, it'll be November. Which is just wild to think, right? November. Everything's Christmas already. I went to Target yesterday and I was like, where's all the Halloween stuff? It's all Christmas. I felt like I was like this the whole time. Like, don't look. I know. But it's already clearance. Yeah. I'm half expecting to see Easter stuff in the store like by mid-November. So they're always so far ahead. I hate it. Like I'm such a like one holiday at a time person. So every store I go in, I feel like I'm just like this. I'm not gonna look at it. Okay, I had 2 other thoughts to share with you quickly. So obviously you have your exam since I saw you last. On my side, from looking at your scores, it went really well. Right? I hope that you feel the same way. But just some kind of perspective. So the high score was 100. There were 3 people who got 100. There were quite a few people who got like 98, 99, 97, like in the very high up there. The low score was a 60. Okay, so a little bit of a range on there. The average was 89.8. Just shy of an 8, right? So there were a lot of really high scores on the exam, which I would hope for and expect since you can do notes in the book and everything. And I never make them like artificially more difficult than they need to be. So I hope that you Hope that you felt that way as well. And then the average amount of time was 61 minutes. Okay, so what that tells me is you had more than enough time, or at least the vast majority of you had plenty of time. Again, did really, really well on that. We have one more exam, which is the final, and the final is just a third test. So it's not cumulative. It's just from basically today forward. Okay, so not that I want you to forget everything that we've covered, but you don't need to study it or anything like that. I also graded all of your papers. So all of your scores for that, I've been like slowly doing them, and I finished the last of them yesterday while watching football, right? So and my fantasy team was winning, so maybe that benefited some of you. I don't know. But I did grade all of those. The biggest reason that people lost points, several of you gave me sources that weren't academic. And if that was the case, like if you gave me a .com or a .org, you lost 5 points. Okay, so if you gave me an academic source, you got 10 points. If it was non-academic, you got 5. If you didn't give me any source, then you got 0 on that. And there were a few people who didn't give me a source at all. So I found myself writing a lot, consider using the DSM. So if you don't have an academic source, you could always use the DSM. Every single one of you could use the DSM. And you can have more than one source. You just have to have one academic one. And a lot of you had great progress toward your final papers, a lot of like thoughts about disorders, but not sure yet. And that's a good place to be. That final paper is due right after Thanksgiving break. So you have some time still, you have like a solid month, but start thinking about it. As a side note, if you ever want me to look at a rough draft, I'd be happy to read through a rough draft as long as you give it to me like before, maybe like a few days before the final paper is due. I should have time to read it and give you some feedback. Yeah. It's the 27th. So it's that Monday after Thanksgiving break. And I know you're really mad at me for this one, but I built it in there. I won't be here for Thanksgiving break. So I had planned that it's in the syllabus. I might give you an assignment on one of those days just so that I don't have to like technically get a sub or something stupid like that. But we really should have that week off. So my kids have it off, so I will be taking it off. It's built into that, but you'll have that extra time. You can use that for the paper, and you can always send me a rough draft of it. As I said, at any time, I'd be happy to look it over. Okay, so from here, we go into our last unit. We're going to look at schizophrenia starting today. Then we'll look at personality disorders, which should help a lot of you for your paper. A lot of you have like thoughts around personality disorders. Then we'll look at childhood and adolescence, aging, and then end with forensic psychology, psychology and the law. So those are our topics, our last third, right? Feels like a long time ago that we started, but it also feels like it's gone kind of quickly, at least for me. So are there any other questions about the second part of the paper, the exam, any of that kind of stuff? Schedule things before we move on? Yeah, Jake, what's up?
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you after class about my second paper.
Okay.
Because I know like it was not like good grade at all, and I haven't explained that. So
yeah, we could talk after class. That's totally fine. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. So schizophrenia is what we will start today, and this will take us like a day and a half to do. But we'll get into this. This is the most severe disorder that we've covered so far, right? So we've covered a bunch of different disorders at this point. Schizophrenia is a little bit different. So we'll talk about that. Schizophrenia is what we call a psychotic disorder. And it's really the first psychotic disorder that we have focused on. We've talked about disorders that have elements of psychosis, but this is like by nature, kind of the core psychotic disorder. And if someone is psychotic, it means that they've lost touch with reality. Okay, so a lot of disorders are neurotic, like you can't control your emotions, you have too much anxiety, too much like mood variation. Here, we're talking about someone who's lost contact with reality. And the nature of this disorder makes it hard to stay in touch with reality. People hear voices that aren't there. They see things that aren't there. They believe things that aren't true, and sometimes really operate according to those beliefs. And all of these different symptoms that people can have make it hard to stay in touch with the world around you, to be grounded in the world around you. And with this disorder, there are just an absolute ton of symptoms that people can have. Enough so that we used to have 4 or 5 different types of schizophrenia, though they got rid of that in the current DSM. The DSM-4 text revision had 5 different types based on symptoms. Now we just talk about all the different symptoms. So we'll look at that today. But there are a lot of them. There are positive ones, negative ones, and psychomotor ones, and just an absolute ton of different symptoms. And I found a little video, it's old, but it's a wonderful example to kind of introduce this disorder. And what you see is this man named Gerald who shows a lot of different symptoms. Listen to the things that he says. They're kind of odd. That's very typical. He's got some motor things, which are also typical. But I think it's a good way to start thinking about it. So I'll play that for you really quickly. Right, you can see that he's got that physical symptom. Some of the things that he says, odd, right? To say the picture has a headache, right? That's not a typical thing, right? He kind of has a, you know, they ask him about that, and then he talks about like when egg and sperm meet and it's fusion. I mean, and just like off, right? And that's something that you see a lot with this disorder, just really odd thinking, disorganized thinking. Oftentimes, again, like seeing or believing things that aren't true. And we're talking about this mainly in adults, even harder to diagnose in children, because oftentimes kids have imaginary friends or believe or see things that, you know, we don't know what's real and what isn't. My daughter, when she was 5, 6, my daughter Emma looked at the corner of our room and said, "The woman in the corner tells me to do things at night." And I was like, okay, and we're moving. Like, I was like, "Do you see her right now?" And she's like, "Uh-huh." I just wanted to cry. I was like, okay, she has an active imagination. Like, that's what I'm gonna stick with that. But then when my dog started growling at the corner, I felt very differently about it. So I mean, I don't know. It's really tricky with children to identify these things. But in adults, right, it's often a little bit more obvious, right, to see. But those odd thinking processes, unusual behaviors, kind of odd speech, those are all things that are very common with this disorder. And we'll talk about each one of them in the coming slides. So just kind of a little introduction and a couple of other things too. This is something that has been around for a long time, but it went through a couple of interesting like phases. So like in the 1800s, like I like giving you that kind of the background a little bit of some of these. In the 1800s, around 1800 specifically, is when we had the first case recorded in literature. So like in like psychiatric or medical literature, this was the first time that we had an account of schizophrenia that was formally recorded. Now, it was obviously around a long time before that, but this was the first time we had that. It was like unintelligible, irrational behavior that was documented for the first time. Around the like mid 1800s, we actually thought that this was a dementia. Schizophrenia in the 1800s was called demence precoce, which means early dementia. Dementia is stuff like Alzheimer's, right? Lewy body, we'll talk about those in a later chapter. But with dementias, people don't get better, right? They progressively deteriorate over time, but we thought that it was like a kind of dementia because people were not so responsive to the world around them. They were struggling, but we noticed that people sometimes did get better and this didn't fit. So in 1908, and I won't ask you these dates, but is when the term schizophrenia was coined. And it comes from 2 words, schiza and phren, literally meaning a splitting of the mind. And I think this is a little misleading because what happens is people often confuse this with dissociative identity disorder, but they're totally different. The media loves to combine them to make it more dramatic, and that can happen. But with schizophrenia, there's one personality. It's just the connections within that personality are very fragmented. There's disorganized thinking and delusions and whatnot. Remember, in dissociative identity disorder, there's more than one personality. Now, technically, one of those personalities could have schizophrenia if we get really wild, but they are very different disorders that the media loves to blend together. So just something to be aware of. And again, what we'll focus mainly on today is looking at all of the different symptoms that people can have with schizophrenia. And as I mentioned, there are quite a few. Any thoughts or questions or comment stories, anything so far? Yeah, Jake.
Oh, I know that there's the famous mathematician that has.
Yeah.
I don't remember his name, but I remember watching a documentary about it a while ago.
Right, and then they made I don't know if you're talking about like From a Beautiful Mind. They made a whole movie about that character based on famous. Yeah, I'm forgetting his name as well. Yeah, it unfortunately tends to affect very brilliant people. It tends to be there's a high correlation between high intelligence and schizophrenia, interestingly. But yeah, there are quite a few like prominent people or very intelligent people who have unfortunately been affected by this as well. Yeah.
So I was sick. It was so bizarre. And I wondered if one day he'd want to see what that was like.
Mhm.
So I have a whole slew of videos of him exhibiting all kinds of behavior.
Yeah,
He did get brave last year and watched me.
interesting. How did he react to it?
He looked at some pictures.
Yeah,
And they were sad to him.
sure.
When he was really starving himself, he came home from school and he laid down. He was just laying on the floor, and his arms were so skinny, and so he does not like that picture.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm like, I just thought maybe you would want, since you were kind of really out of it at some point. And then I also kept copious notes because every time we change a med.
Yeah.
But then in all the behavior that was exhibited, just so that I could explain, like doctors ask you, and it gets harder and harder to remember.
Oh, sure, sure.
So it was so nice to like, here's 15 single page pages.
Yeah.
And pages and
Smart to document things like that, for sure.
it is,
Mhm.
but I should have known that. I ended up in this someday.
Mhm.
Because a lot of parents don't document it to that degree.
Yeah.
It was one thing I could control.
Yeah, yeah, and it's all about what you can control and what can help you feel a little better in whatever capacity you can, right? And it's hard to see yourself not at your best or not how you view yourself, right? So I can imagine that could be a hard one to watch or to see, not only for you but for him.
Yeah, yesterday I was explaining the soloist again.
Yeah.
And I really like
Mhm.
that the guy, in the end was given respect he
Yeah.
deserved.
And he was a very brilliant person. Again, very talented, very brilliant. We're going to watch a clip or two of that from this related to the stuff on this slide. A great movie and book, portraying somebody struggling with schizophrenia.
Yes, I came home and all of a sudden I could hear him like,
Oh, he's like, I'm going the musical route. I love it. Yeah.
what does it say?
Demonse precoce. It's Latin. Probably why you were like, I don't know what that is. Right? Demonse precoce. And then early dementia. Yeah, DEMENCE. I was gonna spell it. I'm so used to spelling stuff for my daughter Emma, and I'm like D. E. No, sorry. So PRECOCE. Demonse precoce. Early dementia. So lots of symptoms, right? These are by far the most common. The positive symptoms of schizophrenia are the most common. They're the ones that are most well known. They're the most dramatic most of the time as well. And psychology does this, right? Psychology loves to use the words positive and negative. We don't mean good and bad most of the time. Okay, so these aren't like the good symptoms of schizophrenia, right? These are the excesses or additions. By positive, we usually mean adding, right? So here we're adding beyond like normal thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So things that are in excess or like plus, right, to our normal behavior. And so the things we have up here: delusions, loose associations, hallucinations, and inappropriate affect. All of these are very, very common symptoms of schizophrenia. Delusions are false beliefs about reality that have no basis in facts. And there are a lot of different types of delusions that people can have. These are thinking patterns. Okay, so some of the most common Paranoid. The most common type of delusion that people have with schizophrenia. Paranoid delusions are when you think that people are out to get you, that there's conspiracy theories. So there's that, camera that's up there in our projector that's recording and watching everything that we do. If we say certain words, we're going to be in trouble. We have to be careful. Not really, as far as I know. Anyway, right? But it's that the government's out to get you. People are out to get me, right? It's a lot of very paranoid ideation or paranoid delusions. It's by far the most common. People also have what are called delusions of grandeur. Believing that there's somebody grand or important, right? So believing that you're the president. And then you go around acting like the president, right? Or you believe that you're somebody famous, or you just believe that you're really important. It's very common to see people who have schizophrenia ending up homeless. There's a very strong correlation between homelessness and schizophrenia. If you go to big cities like San Francisco, for example, or Los Angeles, right, you oftentimes see a lot of homeless populations. I went to a conference, years ago in San Francisco, and there was a guy standing on the corner dressed in a robe, like he was Jesus, spouting the word of God, right? Kind of believing that he was God in a way, or Jesus in a way. It's a very interesting, memorable trip. I also was flashed by a guy dressed up as Santa, right? That was maybe more memorable than the other because I didn't want to see that. But very common for people to believe there's somebody important or grand, hence the name. There's also delusions of reference. So delusions of reference are when you read into things that are meaningless, but you find meaning in them. And it becomes obsessive for people. I think I shared with you way back, day one, I love escape rooms, right? They're my favorite. I haven't done one in so long at this point. It's been months going through withdrawals, right? I'm ready. But I've done 101 of them. I've done a lot of escape rooms. And you have to kind of become obsessed with reference points when you do escape rooms. You have to read into things that are often meaningless. There'll be scratches on the wall and you have to be is that a code? Is that the code for the box? I don't know. And sometimes it's hard to turn that off. But the idea here is that you read into things that don't mean anything. So I'm looking around for a point here. Okay, so see how that desk is empty? It's a pattern if you look at it, actually. Only the even desks in your row are satted. So 1, 3, 5, what? Right, yeah, 1, 3, whatever. Right. Don't check my mind. Right. So there are empty desks in that row. And right here, no one ever sits here. Is there a reason Jackson does, but not today? Right. People don't sit in these spots, right? There must be something in those chairs and a reason that you don't sit there. Why did they put that back there on the wall? See how they put that little box right there? What was it that they were trying to cover? And why is there a hole in this carpet up here? Somebody clearly saw that there was something down here and they were trying to dig it out. And why is that piece of, I could keep going at this point, but there's you look at every little thing, it's meaning everything, that scratch on the wall. Why? What is it, right? Why is this desk here, but there's no chair for it, right? It's just constant, everything has to be meaningful in some way, when it might just be random. And people literally go nuts over it, looking for connections. And it might combine with paranoia, right? Thing after thing after thing connected to each other. And I have an example of this. There's a little bit of side plot, but his obsession with the number 23 is a very common delusion of reference. People get obsessed with a number or a thing. So this is from a movie called The Number 23 with Jim Carrey. Not funny in it, but it's a kid, a little liberal with it at times, but that obsession is so common. It's called a delusion of reference. He just becomes wrapped up in it. He's reading this book and everything he's connecting to his life in this number. Really interesting. They can sometimes pull other people into our delusions. It's called a shared delusion or a shared delusional disorder. There was a movie years ago. I'm a huge horror movie fan and I like creature movies. And there was one called Bug. And I was oh, it's about bugs. This will be great. I'll go see it. As long as there aren't too many spiders in it, I'll be okay. There was not a damn bug in the whole flipping movie. No bugs, no real bugs. Anyway, but it was called Bug. I don't know if I'd recommend it, but it was interesting. The whole thing is about this guy with schizophrenia who has very strong paranoid delusions that everyone is out to get him. The government's out to get him. They're tracking him down. And then he starts to get this belief that there are bugs like you don't ever really see a bug, which I don't know, maybe I'm grateful for. I'm not a big bug fan either, I guess, but there are no bugs anywhere, but he convinces this woman who has feelings for him that there are bugs, and then she starts to believe that there are bugs, and then the two of them go nuts with this obsession about bugs and end up like burning themselves down to get rid of the bugs. I mean, I just was completely not prepared for this movie, but it was really interesting at the same time. Again, I don't know if I'd recommend it, but I'm sharing it with you anyway. My point is that you can bring somebody else into a delusion, especially if they have like strong feelings or like kind of like weak character. You can oftentimes suck somebody into a false belief, almost like he starts to do with his son a little bit in that clip. So delusions, again, are the false beliefs about reality, whether it's like reference or paranoia or grandeur. You believe things that aren't true and then you act on them. Any questions or thoughts or stories or anything about delusions before we go to the next one? Anything there? Loose associations is another really common one. You saw this with Gerald, right? Kind of loosely connected thoughts, right? And sometimes we call this derailment. Normally when somebody's having a conversation, the train stays on the tracks, right? It might veer a little bit, but it stays on the tracks. When someone has schizophrenia, the train jumps tracks constantly, right? And so somebody will be talking about one thing and then they're on to another and then another and then another. It's a very loosely connected, loose associations between the thoughts that they're having. And the reason for this is they have very disorganized thinking. And so the thoughts are disorganized, just like the thinking is. And so what you see is that people might have odd forms of speech, like rhyming or clanging. They might spell things out in an odd way. They might just jump from topic to topic to topic, and it'd be very hard to follow them. You see a little bit of this with a manic episode, but not as intense as you do with this. I have an example of this from The Soloist, as you mentioned earlier, that movie. I have a couple of clips from it. But he has very loose associations, and I put on the captions because he mumbles, so it's sometimes a little hard to make out what he's saying. But I'll play this for you. I think it's a good example of like kind of odd speech, derailment, and these loose associations between things. Great. Lots of examples. He just is all over the place, right? Like thought to thought to thought to thought, very loosely connected to each other. And that's what we would call loose associations or derailment. You see him doing a little bit of like spelling things out or kind of repeating things. That's relatively common. But this is a big one. Oftentimes people have a lot of loose associations and connections. And so it can be very hard to follow a train of thought and a conversation with them. And it makes a challenge. Hallucinations are by far the most common symptom of schizophrenia, right? By far, right? A lot of people, most people who struggle with schizophrenia have hallucinations. And if you've ever hallucinated, it's scary, right? It can be scary, whether it's due to lack of sleep or a drug or a chemical imbalance, right? Hallucinations can be frightening. And most people who have hallucinations have auditory hallucinations, which means that they hear things that aren't there. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I have a hard time listening and focusing just when people are talking around me, let alone if something was yelling at me and I didn't know that it was real or not real, right? It makes it very hard for people to stay in touch with reality when they don't know what around them is real or not, right? Oftentimes these voices can be very menacing or negative or insecure in nature, and it feels like they're talking directly to you. Even though they're not actually there. People can also see things that aren't there, whether that's like people or just shapes or figures. It can also be that you feel things that aren't there, like you have sensations of things like bugs crawling on your skin. It can be a wide variety of things, though hearing voices is by far the most common. Is that a hand?
He always said he imagined them. You can audibly hear them.
Okay. Yeah, and it can go both ways, right? Where you like become obsessed with the thought of like it could be there, almost like an imaginary thing. Or it can be that you literally hear the voices and you don't know if they're real or not real. Like imagine if right now as I'm trying to talk to you, you're hearing another voice like yelling at you, or there are things like floating up here around me. Like that would be so frightening, right? I think I had one episode of hallucinating really badly from a medication. Like I took a medication way back in like high school and I reacted to it really poorly. And I like saw things that weren't there. Like the desks were floating, the curtains were moving. Like I cried. It scared the hell out of me and it went away. Thank God, like after I went off the like medication. But like to live like that would be so scary, right? And that's often times what people with schizophrenia are living with, right? Hearing and seeing things that aren't there. And so then they retreat, which only tends to make it worse. And again, I have an example of this also from the soloist. He has a lot of auditory hallucinations, and you can hear what those voices might be like for somebody. This is what it was like for him. But I think it's a good example of hearing things that aren't there. And again, they're often kind of negative, right? Or preying on your insecurities in some way. I'll play that for you and then we can talk about it. Will it work? Collecting all this conspiracy theory kind of things. So you see some delusions of paranoia and some hallucinations of people. And again, the way that he learns that they aren't real is because they never age, right? And that is something he's able to hold on to later in the movie. But you see him reacting to these things as if they're real. Like he shoves his wife trying to protect her because he's reacting to the hallucination, right? He's yelling at the like things that aren't real. So it can look very different on the outside than it can for somebody who's reacting to things that aren't actually there. But hallucinations, by far, as I mentioned, the most common thing occurring with this. A lot of people hear and see things that aren't actually there. Yeah.
That's gonna be hallucinations for my son. Just to get him to go away.
Yeah.
But NAMI, I took a NAMI family to family class. It's National Alliance for Mental Illness.
Mm-hmm.
And she cut the class in half. And then she'd had half of the people sitting in row of chairs and then shipped the other half out and gave us like different small pieces of paper that had script on it.
Sure.
And we're supposed to say it in different speeds and volume and, you know, all kinds, vary it all kinds of different ways. And then they had to follow the directions of the person in front of them and write something in paper while we were all talking behind them.
Okay.
And no one could do it.
Right.
It's so distracting.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Really hard to focus when there's other voices or just talking even, let alone to you. Right?
And still had just had a polar. So when it came out, it was kind of nice to have that reference of
what it was like. Yeah. And there's a lot of videos on YouTube that you can watch too of like if you put on headphones, like what it would sound like or what it would feel like to have voices like this. It's kind of hard to do like in a group setting, like you have to wear headphones usually to have it be effective, but you could look it up. There's some really interesting ones on there.
There's like a 60 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that's gotten a lot of attention, right? I mean, a lot of research has been done on this. It's very difficult to live with. And the voices, again, voices are so common. And we'll talk about them more with treatment, but they're thought to be due to too much dopamine, you know, which is why a lot of times people do hallucinate when they do drugs or use a lot of substances because it changes your neurotransmitters, the chemicals in your body, and you can experience things that aren't actually there. Any other thoughts or questions or anything else here? Yeah.
Sociology class in school. I really thought they were real too.
I did too. Yeah.
Until like the twist, I was just like that one, like I thought it was about material, but it was really cool.
Yeah.
And it was, and I was like,
yeah, I thought they were too, right? I remember watching it the first time and being like, what? They weren't real. I love those twists, right? I like that. Yeah. You're like, I didn't catch it either. Well, I didn't either, if it makes you feel better. Right. It's and that's something that he holds on to later to help him a little bit with knowing what's real and what isn't. The last one up here, inappropriate affect, is also another common positive symptom. I guarantee that we've all had like a moment of this in our lives. It's not a one-time thing. This is like constantly responding to things that aren't suited to the situation. But I'm sure you've all had a moment where you should have been like more sad or happier or something that didn't quite match the situation. The idea here is that people are responding to internal cues instead of external ones. So they're like laughing or scared or upset or happy based on things that are inside of them and not real. rather than the world that's around them. Really interesting, like probably one of the saddest, most awkward movies I've ever seen. If you watch the new Joker movie or the newer Joker movie, they took an interesting stance that he had like a version of schizophrenia. He hallucinates and sees things that aren't there, and he has wildly inappropriate affect, right? I don't know if it matches my like thoughts of like the Joker character, but it was an interesting take on him. He laughs all the time, even at things that aren't funny, right? I'm going to play just a little bit of a clip for you. It's hard. It's like awkward to watch, right? He's awkward to watch. He did a beautiful job playing this character. I mean, that it could make us uncomfortable is impressive. But I'll play just a minute of this for you. This is a condition that's called pseudobulbar affect, where people have what's called emotional incontinence. They don't react to things. They can't control their emotions in any way. But we could also view it as this, where you're reacting inappropriately with your emotional displays. So again, just a little bit of this. It's not the easiest to watch, but I'll play it for you anyway. So you get the idea, right? It's like, well, keep going. But he's on the bus, right? And he's laughing at nothing. He's laughing at something. Oops, I forgot to resume it. So now I'll pause. Sorry, let me put this back on. There's a scene where they move his hand, right? And he goes like that. And it just has that like weird waxiness to it. And that's something that you can sometimes see. Sometimes see with this, right? Where we get this like odd pattern of grimaces or like those flexy, like waxy flexibility, the rigidity. And we don't know what's happening. It's crazy because we can ask people and they say stuff like, the devil had a hold of me, right? And that's why I couldn't move. Because of the nature of the disorder, it makes it really difficult to figure out what's happening. We tend to think it's like an extreme form of apathy, almost like people don't care enough to do anything. Like if I go back, it's almost like that extreme loss of volition. Like they don't care enough to finish the movement. They don't care enough to like do anything. So that wind, you're all loving all this wind. My courtyard, my decorations are such a mess. I hate it. But we sometimes see that with this, right? Where it's like almost like I just don't care enough to even finish the movement that's there. So people who have schizophrenia have some combination of all of these, right? So they have some combination of like positive, negative, and psychomotor symptoms, and that would qualify them for a diagnosis. And as I said, they used to have different like subtypes, but they got rid of that in the last version of the DSM. Okay. So lots and lots of different symptoms. Any other like stories, comments, questions, anything else about the symptoms at all? Anything else for now? So maybe like one or two more thoughts, and then we'll stop there. I'll get through this slide, and then we'll stop after that. This is something that tends to go through some phases, and I've seen these phases in people. I actually had a young man in my class, like, gosh, it's been like 10 years at this point. He sat right in the front row. He was in this abnormal psych class, and he was in the prodromal phase, and I never would have known it had he not told me. But what we often see is that people go through phases with this disorder. They go through what's called the prodromal, active, and residual phase. And not everybody goes through all of these. Really interesting. Sometimes schizophrenia can go away on its own. It can just kind of get better. And so about 25% of people stay in the prodromal phase, and about 25% go through the residual, and about half have active schizophrenia and need treatment. So what you see is the prodromal phase is when people start to show some signs of things not quite being right. So they're starting to deteriorate. Maybe they're not sure if something was a dream or if it was real. We've all probably had that moment, but it's happening during like wakefulness, right? And they're not sure if something was real or not. Did I really hear that voice? Was there somebody really there? Like, I'm not sure. And there's a lot of like, I'm not sure going on. And then in the active phase, this is when people have like full-blown symptoms of schizophrenia. It's really difficult for them to like manage, hard for them to stay in contact with reality. And this, if they're in the active phase, it requires treatment, right? They're going to need to be treated for this. They're probably going to take medication, which we'll talk about next time. The residual phase is when it kind of goes back to the beginning, right? And sometimes people, as I said, it just kind of goes away, which is why they knew it wasn't a dementia, because dementia tends to escalate and get worse rather than getting better. And we do see that at like 25% of people with schizophrenia do just kind of have it get better and go away on its own. But a lot of people, 50%, half of people, do require treatment because they're in that active, full-blown phase of it. And this tends to affect men and women very evenly, but men later. So women tend to get this earlier in life, like in their like late teens, early 20s. And women and men, it tends to be a little bit later into their 20s and maybe even their 30s. Yeah.
I know that really last you could get like meals of other students who were a drug of outside source.
Yeah.
And is there like a correlation of like people having schizophrenia and turning to that mystical phase after then becoming sober from a certain drug? Is there like a
Sure. Yeah, and so we'll talk about that in a little bit next time. There's something called the diathesis stress perspective, where people can develop schizophrenia because of something like a drug-induced schizophrenia. So if you go off the drug, it might be that the schizophrenia goes away, or sometimes, sadly, it could persist. It could have been enough of a disruption of like your chemical balance so that somebody could have it for the rest of their life. Oftentimes it kind of tapers off and goes away, right? But sadly not always. So it could be either. It could be that it stays, or it could be that it goes away when they stop using the drug. Other thoughts or questions or anything for the moment? So what we'll do on Wednesday, I'll stop here. We'll talk about the causes and treatments of schizophrenia. So somebody, if somebody has the candy thing, bring it back up so you can all grab some more on your way out. If any of you want more candy, I hope you all have a wonderful and safe Halloween, right? Have fun, eat some candy for me, right? I'll see you all on Wednesday.
Hey, question about
Yeah, what's up?
you said like